Young man!
What, MLK?
Why are you just sitting down being lazy?
I know, but I had a long week and I just want to relax and chill and just watch a little TV, that's all.
I didn't have a dream so that you can just sit up there in that chair and be lazy. I see that you have all of these cameras. Why are you not out using them and exercising your creative liberties?
I know I do. And I'm gonna get to it. I'm gonna get out there and shoot, but I just want to just be lazy right now.
Boy, if you don't get up out of that chair and go outside with that camera, go ahead and take the X-M5 and that new lens you got there.
All right, fine. I'm shooting.
Happy MLK, y'all. What's up, good people? Welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone is doing well out there, and happy MLK Weekend. Now, I know by the time you're saying this, it's probably no longer MLK Weekend, but it is for me, and it's a pretty significant holiday because it is the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights movement, and his overall fight for equality. And so for me, as an African-American man, that does really hold a lot of significance because without him and the others like him who fought for me and for future generations, who knows if I'd even be doing photography, YouTube, having the job that I have, or just any other types of freedoms that I enjoy in the United States. I am truly appreciative of MLK, and I want to go out and capture some of the festivities that are going to be happening for him this weekend. And so I'm going to be taking the Fuji X-M5 out, but I actually have a new lens, and it is the Pergear 25mm f1.7 manual focus lens. This lens at the time of this recording is only $70. I repeat, $70, under $100, and it is tiny. Feels like it's gonna be a pretty good little lens. I'm curious to see what the glass is gonna be like. Now, Pergear was kind enough to send this lens out for my review. They have paid me no additional money. They just want me to try the lens out, use it, and give my thoughts on it. And so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be taking it out this weekend, capturing some festivities, and really just seeing what this little lens can do. Let's take a closer look at it real quick. It has this nice two-tone look to it, this black and silver. And I will say, this feels like it's really well built. I think it is mostly metal. Maybe some elements of it are plastic, but overall, this feels pretty well built. The focus ring here feels pretty smooth. It doesn't feel like it's giving me too much friction. It gives me just enough to where I can feel like a nice little glide to it. Also, it does have these little notches here. I'm assuming this red dot applies for both the focus ring and the aperture ring here. But going down to the aperture ring is clickable. And so as you move from one setting to the next, it does have a nice satisfying click to it. Not too loud, but you can feel it. It really helps you, one, know that you are locked into a setting, and then two, differentiate itself from the focus ring up top. Now, looking at it side by side with the Fuji 27mm, it's pretty compact. It's taller for sure, but as far as the circumference of it, it looks smaller than the 27mm. And so 37mm filter thread here, 39mm filter thread here. Definitely a good candidate for the X-M5 if you're trying to keep your kit nice and compact. And so here we have it on our Fuji X-M5 here, and just looking at the overall profile of it, it's not bad. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that because this is a manual focus lens, it does not have any electrical contacts. And so using this with the X-M5, there's gonna be some settings that you're gonna need to be mindful of. First thing, if you're in a custom setting and you know you have set your camera to autofocus continuous, just go ahead and change that to manual. Secondly, from the little tool icon here, go down to button and dial setting and make sure that shoot without lens is on. There are some other settings that I want to get into strictly in the autofocus manual focus tab. Focus check, I think this is off by default, but I think if you just press in on this little joystick here, it lets you do the focus check anyway. So that does work. That's just a camera function that punches in on the sensor. And so that's pretty much the settings I've changed in order to use a manual focus lens with no electrical contacts. But yeah, y'all, this is the Pergear 25mm f1.7. Let's go test it out.
All right, y'all, so we're heading over to the event. We're gonna see what we can see. Looks like there's already a lot of people over there, so I'm excited to see what we get. All right, y'all, that was great. I'm just now leaving, shooting manual with the Fuji X-M5 and also this little Pergear lens. I think it worked out all right. I wish I would have had something a little bit tighter in order to kind of get over the crowd, but I think this worked out pretty well. I'm excited to see how the images went. One thing I will say is that because people were moving for the parade, I was shooting in like my high-speed shooting mode, and so got a lot of burst shots. Another thing I should mention is that if you're using the X-M5 and say you've programmed any settings into your custom settings and you change it, like for instance for me, I changed it from autofocus continuous to manual mode in order for me to use the manual features. If this goes to sleep, when you wake it back up, it will revert back to its previous settings. So just be mindful of that. That way you don't end up messed up. But we're about to hit the next spot. Day 2 coming up. It is day 2 and we are at the World Beat Cultural Center over at Balboa Park, and so should be some pretty good MLK festivities. We're gonna get over there and we're gonna see what we can find.
Okay, y'all. So, MLK Weekend. I was fortunate enough to go to a couple of events, and overall, I will say it was an amazing experience. It just felt like one big community. There were people there of all ages, all races, all creeds, and they were all there just unified in celebrating Dr. King and his overall mission in the civil rights movement. And everyone was just happy. It was just a happy time over this past weekend. And so I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed capturing it and just getting a lot of really good images. But speaking of images, let me talk about the X-M5 and overall just doing manual focus on this camera. Now I will say, I was a little hesitant because it does not have an EVF, but it wasn't that bad. Now mind you, I do have 20/20 vision and it might even be a little bit better, so I want to be totally empathetic to anyone out there who may not have the best vision and really needs the EVF, but for me, it really wasn't that much of a deterrent for me just using the LCD screen. I will say, I set my LCD screen to the maximum brightness because I was shooting in the bright sun. I think it worked out for me. It was fine. I was able to see what I wanted to frame in the shot all right, and yeah, it was all good. Other settings that I was heavily relying on were definitely the focus check, just pressing in on the joystick in order to crop into the sensor in order to make sure that whatever I was trying to focus on was actually in focus. I think that helped a lot. It made me go a little bit slower in order to really make sure that I was getting things in focus in the shot. There are other techniques that I also employed with the X-M5 and manual focus, and that was setting my shutter speed high because things were in high movement, especially with the parade. I wanted to make sure I captured the motion, and so a lot of times I would just focus on a particular point, and then I was able to just capture shots really quickly, capture that motion, stop the motion, and make sure that I was getting the action in focus. Now another thing I use, and this is something that I have not used on this camera up until this point, and I don't even think I've used it on the X-T50 to be honest, but I went into the burst burst mode, the high-speed shooting mode, and I leveraged that as well because, once again, just like with the high shutter speed, there's a lot of movements, and so I want to capture a lot of different poses, a lot of different movements, because you never know what's going to be the most interesting. So once you get things in focus with the lens, you can start to do things to kind of pause the action, especially if you know there's going to be a lot of movement from your subjects in the shot. But overall, I was able to nail focus on most of my images, and I think the quality came out pretty good. Now, speaking of image quality, let's get into this Pergear 25mm lens. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, this lens is only $70, and I do think after the past couple of days that this lens does punch above its price point. We already talked about build quality and how things feel, but in practice and using it, it was pretty nice to use. I will say that the focus ring was really nice and malleable. In fact, a lot of times I was using it one-handed while shooting in my portrait mode. Now, something I do want to mention about manually focusing with this lens is that when you're turning this lens all the way to the left in order to get to infinity, you will reach true infinity before you get to the full stop of the focus ring. And so that's something you definitely want to be mindful of, because if you turn it all the way too far, your shots are going to be out of focus. You have to go straight to the infinity symbol, which is just before the focus ring gets to a full stop when turning it all the way to the left. And as far as aperture settings go, I will just admit that most of the time I was shooting at f11, and that's just because I was shooting in the bright sun, and I just wanted to make sure that I was getting the whole scene in focus versus just an individual subject. But there were other times where I was shooting indoors, or I was shooting things a little bit more close up, where I did go ahead and stop down to f1.7 just to kind of see what that aperture did as far as brightening up the image and just looking at the quality of the detail that I was getting at such a low aperture. But speaking of detail, let's get into image quality a little bit, because I do think this lens has some quirks, which at $70 aren't that big of a hang up for me, but I feel like you should know. Now, the biggest thing that stood out to me about the image quality when shooting with this lens is that the images come out a little low contrast. That is not my particular style. I prefer to have darker shadows and have a little bit more contrast in my shots, but I noticed these images produced with this lens tend to be lower contrast than other lenses that I'm used to shooting with. And so what that means is basically you probably have to take images into editing, add a little bit of contrast, and then you'll be good to go, which isn't a big deal, especially for a lens that's only $70. But just to let you know, if you're the type of person that likes to shoot photos, send them to your phone, and then share, there will probably be one extra step in adding a little bit of contrast to your photos. I also have to mention that because I was shooting in the bright sunlight, this lens is definitely susceptible to lens flare. And I don't believe this lens came with a lens hood. It is a 37mm filter thread, so I don't know if I'd be able to find a lens hood or some type of filter to put on top of this. I don't know how common that filter thread size is. I'll have to do my research. But yeah, just letting you know, this lens is susceptible to lens flare, so you really have to be mindful of that when you're shooting with it and pointing it directly or in the vicinity of your light source. But all things considered, I think the image quality was actually pretty good with this lens. Images came out really sharp. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't pixel peep any of the detail of these images just because for the type of shooting that I was doing, the street photography, capturing events, you know, I think for the most part, it's about the scene. It's not about the individual little details, it's about the full scene. So I didn't do too much pixel peeping, but the times that I did zoom in and look at photos, I thought the detail was there, it was spot on, and yeah, I think this is a sharp little lens. So I think overall my rating on just shooting with this Pergear 25mm lens, I think it's a nice little street lens. You know, it's compact, it's small, it's got good build quality, it's easy to maneuver the focus ring and the aperture ring, and yeah, the images it produces are pretty decent. I wouldn't say they're like top notch, but they're pretty decent, and I think with like some minimal editing, you can get them to where you want them. But yeah, y'all, that is MLK Weekend with the X-M5 and manual focus. If you're interested in the Pergear 25mm lens, I will leave a link to it in the description. It is an affiliate link, so I do get a small kickback should you choose to purchase from it, but I will leave that down there for you. If you like this video, go ahead and drop this video a like. If you have not subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell to stay informed on future content, and until next time, y'all, I will catch y'all later.